The summer of 1876 was a pivotal moment in American history, one that would resonate through the ages for its heroism and tragedy. I, George W. Glenn, served as a soldier in H&M Troop of the 7th U.S. Cavalry, and I found myself thrust into the chaos of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, an event that would become legendary and tragic in equal measure. This account aims to capture not only the events as they unfolded, but also the emotions, camaraderie, and stark realities of war that shaped our fates. Our story begins with the urgent orders that came from higher command, commanding us to leave Fort Rice and report to Fort Lincoln, Dakota Territory. The atmosphere was charged with tension. The air was thick with the unspoken dread of conflict between the United States government and the Native American tribes, particularly the Sioux and Cheyenne, who were fiercely defending their lands against encroachment. Upon our arrival at Fort Lincoln, we quickly set up camp alongside the other troops. The days were filled with an unsettling mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Just a few days later, hostile scouts were spotted near our encampment. Their presence was not just a warning, it was a declaration of impending war. Consequently, the 7th Cavalry was ordered to prepare for immediate action. On May 17th, we broke camp, laden with approximately 25 to 30 wagons filled with supplies. The steamer Far West was enlisted to transport provisions and ordnance stores, as well as to evacuate any wounded soldiers in case of battle. As we readied ourselves for this treacherous journey, I felt a mix of determination and apprehension, knowing the dangers that lay ahead. Our regiment marched through Bismarck at 10 a.m., the air charged with anticipation. Mrs. George A. Custer accompanied us, along with the U.S. Paymaster, who made a critical decision to distribute pay at Heart River. This precaution was essential. He aimed to prevent the soldiers from lingering in Bismarck, where temptations of town life, chiefly alcohol, might cause more than a few to linger longer than they should. After receiving our pay, we began constructing a pontoon bridge to facilitate the crossing of the Heart River. However, our progress was soon hampered by relentless rainstorms that transformed the terrain into a treacherous swamp. Each step became a battle against the elements, and it felt as though nature itself conspired against us. By the end of May, after enduring days of heavy rain and even a snowstorm, we finally reached the Little Missouri River. Here, we set up camp, grateful for a brief respite from the harsh weather. We remained there until June 4th, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, and we prepared to move to a drier campsite between the Little Missouri and Powder Rivers. On June 5th, the familiar sound of boots and saddles echoed through the camp, urging us to prepare for the next leg of our journey. By June 7th, we had reached Powder River, where General Terry made a crucial discovery, an Indian trail. This was no mere coincidence. It signaled that we were closing in on our adversaries. General Terry promptly dispatched scouts to track the trail, and upon their return, they confirmed our fears. The Indians were headed toward the Little Bighorn. This was not just another day in the life of a soldier, it was the beginning of something monumental. Terry made the decision to leave the wagon train behind at Powder River and proceed with a lighter pack train, carrying only essential supplies. Those who could not endure the journey were left behind with a guard. Our ranks, now diminished to around 100 men, were filled with a mix of anxiety and determination as we pressed onward along the Yellowstone River. As we marched, the landscape shifted from familiar terrain to the heart of the land we were poised to invade. By June 16th, we reached the Tongue River, where we encountered Indian burial sites. The graves were raised on platforms supported by stakes, cradling the remains of those who had passed. The sight filled me with unease, a reminder of the culture and reverence the Native Americans had for their dead. In a decision that would haunt me, our regiment made a fateful choice. We dismantled these graves, discarding the remains into the river, an act of profound disrespect. I still feel the weight of that choice. I recall drinking water from the river, just 100 yards downstream from where we had disposed of the bodies, a thought that now fills me with dread. What consequences would we face for our actions? As we continued our march, I remember the discomfort and trepidation among the men. Days passed, and we witnessed the unsettling presence of death around us. One particularly disturbing sight was that of a decomposed papoose lying at the base of a tree, likely fallen from one of the graves we had disturbed. Each step forward felt heavy with the weight of our actions, and I couldn't help but wonder if we had invited calamity upon ourselves. Convergence at Rosebud Creek the calm before the storm. A few days later, we arrived at Rosebud Creek, where the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Here, we encountered Colonel Gibbon and his troops, along with the steamer Far West once more. It was at this critical juncture that General Custer received his final orders. The weight of leadership hung heavily on him, as he prepared to distribute supplies and reinforce our troops for the battle ahead. On June 24th, we departed from Rosebud Creek, marching steadily along the Rosebud River. The signs of impending conflict were everywhere, and I felt the air crackle with tension. Abandoned camps lined our path, remnants of the Native Americans who had fled. We marched day and night, the only breaks coming at midnight to rest our weary horses. Each step drew us closer to an inevitable confrontation. On the morning of June 25th, we were resupplied with ammunition, bolstering our spirits for the impending clash. It was during this time that Mitch Boyer, our half-breed scout, returned with critical news. The village ahead contained between 8,000 to 10,000 inhabitants. The severity of this revelation sent a ripple of anxiety through our ranks. Despite Boyer's warning, Custer remained steadfast. He dismissed the seriousness of the situation, opting to press forward despite the overwhelming odds. On June 25th, Custer led us until we were within 5 miles of the Little Bighorn River. He called a halt and began issuing his final commands, directing Major Reno to remain close behind with the rest of the troops and the pack train while he would lead 5 companies into battle. Custer, determined to maintain the element of surprise, even brought along Mrs. Custer's horse, Sadie, ensuring he had a fresh mount for the impending engagement. With orders given, Custer dashed ahead, but Reno, unfortunately, veered off course, losing his way among the hills. When Reno finally emerged, he received a dispatch from trumpeter John Martin, urging him to hurry back with the packs, reporting a large village ahead. Instead of following Custer's trail, Reno inexplicably chose to diverge, moving 4 miles up the Little Bighorn River to the left of the village. When he reached the bluffs overlooking the river, he realized he was surrounded. The overwhelming presence of Indians became evident, and it was clear we were in dire straits. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Custer initiated his charge, and Reno followed shortly thereafter. As soon as Reno crossed the river, he encountered a massive force of Indian warriors emerging from the woods. He ordered his men to dismount and fight on foot, but panic spread through the ranks. The soldiers struggled to maintain order as chaos erupted. Many fled toward the river, trying to escape, but the Indians began picking them off one by one. The battlefield became a maelstrom of confusion and fear. I remember the desperation in the air as we faced a tide of warriors, each of us grappling with the reality of our situation. Reno suffered devastating casualties, and the realization that we were not just fighting an enemy, but an overwhelming force weighed heavily on us. As the battle raged, we regrouped on the bluffs overlooking the river, trying to hold our ground. H Troop occupied one of the hills, while the other troops took defensive positions on the nearby heights. The Indians launched wave after wave of assaults against us, their intent clear: to seize our position and wipe out Reno's command. Despite being outnumbered, we fought back with everything we had. The sounds of battle filled the air: gunfire, war cries, and the cries of our wounded comrades. I will never forget the sight of the enemy charging up the hill, arrows flying through the air as we stood resolute, determined to protect our fellow soldiers. As the day wore on, it became painfully clear that our ammunition was running low. H Troop was nearly depleted, and a sense of desperation settled over us like a heavy fog. We exchanged worried glances, each man acutely aware of the critical nature of our situation. The sounds of battle continued to reverberate around us, but the growing realization that we might not be able to sustain our defense weighed heavily on our hearts. In a moment of collective anxiety, we all looked to one another, waiting for someone to step forward to fetch more ammunition from the ravine below. The pack train, which held our remaining supplies, was exposed to enemy fire, making any attempt to retrieve more ammunition a perilous venture. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as fear gripped our hearts. Seeing no one else willing to take the risk, I made the decision to volunteer, alongside my fellow soldier, Jones. Our trek down into the ravine felt like walking into the jaws of death. With every step, I felt the weight of my decision, knowing that our comrades depended on us. The atmosphere was charged with the sounds of gunfire and the anguished cries of the wounded. a cacophony that served as a grim reminder of the stakes we faced. Tragically, as we made our way down into the ravine, disaster struck. Just as we reached the ammunition, Jones was struck by enemy fire. I watched helplessly as he fell, his life extinguished in an instant. I was overcome with sorrow, yet I knew I had to carry on. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed a box of pistol cartridges, knowing that it was the only option left. As I began my ascent back up the hill, my heart pounded in my chest. Just then, a bullet struck the box I was carrying. I fell to the ground, pretending to be dead, praying that the Indians would overlook me. Miraculously, they did not seem to notice, and I managed to stay still until Benteen sent men down to retrieve the ammunition box. I whispered to them that I was just resting and would be there shortly. When I finally reached the top, the Indians launched another fierce charge. The tension was palpable as the air filled with shouts and the sounds of combat. Our situation was growing increasingly desperate, yet I felt a surge of determination as I rejoined my comrades in defense of our position. The night of June 25th stretched on, a battle of endurance as much as a fight for survival. The intensity of the combat had decreased, but we remained vigilant, fully aware that the enemy could attack again at any moment. We dug in, using butcher knives and any tools we could find to carve out shallow trenches. The wounded lay scattered among us, their cries for water haunting our thoughts. Our supplies were running low, and rationing became a grim necessity. To provide some relief for the wounded, we opened boxes of tomatoes and canned fruits, items usually reserved for the officers, and distributed them among those who needed it. Captain Benteen organized a water party to fetch water from the river, but the task was fraught with danger. He ordered that only the wounded were to receive water, while the able-bodied men were expected to fend for themselves. Throughout the day on June 26th, we managed to hold our positions against the sporadic Indian attacks, but our situation remained dire. When General Terry's forces finally arrived on the morning of June 27th, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, tempered by the pain of the losses we had endured. Terry immediately inquired about Custer's whereabouts. Reno, shaken from the events of the past few days, could only report that the last he had heard was the sound of gunfire downstream at sundown on the evening of the 25th. The grim discovery of Custer's fate awaited us. Terry's forces quickly searched the battlefield, where Custer's command had made their last stand. I was among those sent to help bury the dead, and the sight was horrifying. Custer and his men lay scattered across the battlefield, many mutilated and marked by arrows. Among the fallen were Custer himself, his brothers Tom and Boston, and his brother-in-law Captain Calhoun. As we buried the fallen, I was struck by the heavy weight of responsibility that lay on our shoulders. We had been part of something monumental, yet it had ended in tragedy. Custer's decisions, his overconfidence, and his failure to heed the warnings cost us dearly. The battle would be remembered not only for the bravery of the soldiers, but also for the mistakes that led us to this point. General Custer faced severe criticism for his actions, and it seemed justifiable. His refusal to wait for reinforcements, to communicate effectively with General Terry, and to follow the original campaign plan had all contributed to our defeat. In the weeks and months that followed, the nation grappled with the implications of the battle. Custer's name became both revered and reviled. Memorials were erected, and his legacy became a complex tapestry woven with both valor and tragedy. The Native Americans, too, faced their own challenges as the conflict escalated, and their way of life was further threatened by the advancing settlers and soldiers. The Battle of the Little Bighorn serves as a pivotal moment in American history, illustrating the complexities of conflict, leadership, and the indomitable spirit of those who fought. It is a tale that echoes through time, reminding us of the need for respect, understanding, and humility in the face of cultural differences. For those of us who survived, the lessons were profound. We understood the importance of communication, strategy, and the need for cooperation among our ranks. As I reflect on those days, I am reminded that the cost of war is steep, and the memories of sacrifice should never be forgotten. The Little Bighorn was not just a battle, it was a clash of cultures, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder of the price we pay for our ambitions. As I recount this tale, I honor the memories of my comrades who fell that day, and I hope their sacrifices will serve as a reminder for future generations to tread carefully in the pursuit of their goals.